All right, greetings everybody. Just wanted to make an update video on the hybrid turbo that we have running on the Giulia 2.0 liter. We put on the, now they call it the 400 horsepower version of the gottuned turbo on here, which has the GT2867R wheels, and just been messing around with different turbo maps and as far as different boost maps and profiles and such, and just wanted to update everybody here. We've got about I think 1,500 miles or so on this turbo, and basically been also working to try to make sure that the data that I'm collecting is good data. So anybody that knows me probably knows that I am a just a total data nerd, and I like to make sure the data is correct. So spent a ton of time with Terry at BMS, who produces the JB4, on getting the intake air temperatures correct. So they are validated and correct now, which is just awesome to have. So I don't have to run MES or anything like that. For data logging now, we have good intake air temperatures, which I actually monitor. I find more important to monitor than boost. You know, unless there's a problem, your boost, you gotta kind of know what it is depending upon the ambience out. You kind of pretty much know what it should be. But intake air temps will always alert you if something's wrong. And they also let you know how much power you can make, how much timing you can make. So that is good to see. In fact, as your intake air temps reduce, you'll oftentimes see a little bit reduced boost because you're hitting those torque targets. So anyway, let's not nerd out just yet. One of the things I wanted to talk about in this video is first of all, getting accurate boost readings. So one of the things that people talked about on the N54 Tech forums is that the boost that's coming from the JB4 logging is not matching MES. And so I went ahead and took JB4 out of the equation by putting it in map 0, which is just stock, just running stock boost straight off the ECU, and compared stock boost off the ECU with what the JB4 was logging. And right here you can see I stratified RPM. So here's RPM taken from MES, and here's RPMs, which I tried to match up as perfectly as possible from the JB4 logs. And then here's the boost from the MES logs, and here's the boost from the JB4 logs, and here's the difference column. So as an example, let's say at 2,500 RPM roughly, 2584 and 2565, MES said 24.8 PSI, whereas JB4 said 23. It's a difference that JB4 was reading reading 1.8 PSI low. Actually, you know, like more significantly, let's see where it was worse off, was probably right there at 4,500 RPM, 4,518 versus 4,535 RPM. MES said 26.4 PSI. That's at the boost sensor in the manifold. And JB4 said 23.1. So it was off 3.3 PSI. And then 2.8, 2.4, and 2.9 PSI by a roughly red line, which is at 5,800 and change RPM. So as you can see, the differences that JB4 was reading low by anywhere between 1.5 PSI and 3.3 PSI. And the reason for that I found out was that JB4, when Terry developed this, he developed it based upon a mechanical boost gauge, which is a great thing. I mean, that's the best way to validate your numbers, unless you're grabbing, you know, where's the best place to grab boost gauge data? I'll put a mechanical boost gauge is on the boost tube, and this is the tube that comes out from the turbo outlet, and it starts to go to the intercooler. And this is where most people would mount, you know, a boost gauge somewhere. You know, it's very easy to mount onto. Some people even make this pipe metal, and they have, you know, a fitting there for a boost gauge. But it's an easy place to tap. I suspect that's where they tap. Whereas, where is the MES grabbing the data from? Down here at the intake manifold. So there's an intercooler in there, and there's the intake manifold, and that's where that sensor is leading to, and that's where MES is grabbing the data. So let's go back in here where it's a little more quiet and talk. So if you're grabbing data from the boost tube, which again is where most people would probably tap, somewhere at the boost tube, you're going to be grabbing a different boost level than where MES is grabbing the boost from, which is at the intake manifold. Why is that? Well, first of all, you can get different boost levels at different places in the system for a variety of reasons, but probably the biggest reason that I can think of for this anomaly, or difference, I should probably just say, is that the boost level at the boost tube is taken pre-intercooler, and the temperatures under wide open throttle, which is of course when you're going to be taking the boost readings, it doesn't matter, the light throttle is really not going to do much for you. So under wide open throttle, that pre-intercooler boost air temperature gets up to 350 degrees Fahrenheit or above. Let that sink in. 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Whereas that same air after the intercooler might be at, let's say, a full throttle 350 degree Fahrenheit air could be as little as 100 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe 110 degrees Fahrenheit. So that is going to be a tremendous difference in boost because of the density of that air. So what did we do? We went ahead and hooked up the Vaitrix boost gauge right here, and we validated it against JB4, and I'll show you some runs that we did so that we could see if indeed the JB4 is off. And what we found is, yes, indeed it is getting different boost pre-intercooler, most likely, as opposed to post-intercooler. Okay, so let's just show some runs here of fifth gear runs. We're going to do 1500 RPM to redline, and we're going to compare what we get with the Vaitrix gauge, which is direct wired to the map sensor that is located in the intake manifold near the intercooler. So we're going to compare this direct wire, and this is pre JB4 manipulation, so we're getting direct information straight from that boost sensor there, and we're going to compare it to what JB4 is calculated that it thinks that the boost is, and we'll show you those differences here during the runs. We're also going to be collecting data on intake air temperature. I'm going to show you just how heat soaked we can get this car, and just how, in my opinion, effective the stock heat exchanger and intercooling system is. Is there room for improvement? Yeah, there always is, with heat exchangers and intercooling systems, but there is nothing dangerous about the numbers that we're seeing with this level of boost, and certainly with the stock turbo, nothing even close to being problematic. But with the hybrid turbo, even running, in some cases here 29 psi to redline, it is keeping up pretty darn well in 70, 75 degree ambient temps here in South Florida. When it does get up to 95, 100 degree ambient temps, the temps do get a little bit higher, but they've still been within normal limits, so I'm impressed by that. Would I like them better? Yeah, and in those cases, in those hot days and running 30 psi boost or something like that, I would absolutely recommend, and we'll throw a larger heat exchanger up front and test that. But that being said, we're running safe right now, so that's at least great to have that safety, and we can increase that margin of safety by doing a simple heat exchanger upgrade up front. Okay, we're gonna do another fifth gear run here. We're going to do one more run also with the car completely heat soaked. Here what I've done is the absolute worst thing you can do for a car. Did a run up to like 130 miles an hour, stopped the car completely with engine running and just let it sit. So the car was at its absolute hottest, but it had air running over it, and then we just took air, and now no air has been running over the heat exchangers. They're acting as a heat sink instead of a heat exchanger and an intercooler. So we got the temperatures up to 129 degrees. There's nothing we can do about that anyway. It doesn't matter how many intercoolers, heat exchangers you put on it. When the car is sitting still and there's no air going over it, we're going to get intake temps that just skyrocket. But let's see how the car does now, completely heat soaked, and then doing some runs. So we're going to get up to fifth gear here. Here we are, and let's do it. 60 miles an hour. You see the intake's temps came down. We're at about 34 degrees over ambient. Let's see what happens when we hit it. All right, hopefully that gave us some good examples of the boost differences that we're seeing, and you know, the importance of making sure that you're collecting the best data possible from multiple sources to make sure you validate it. And you know, we're going to be running off the Vaitrix as far as boost direct wire, so that's going to really be awesome now for making sure that we've got great data, and the intake temp data now is absolutely spot on. We validated that, so that's great. So what can we do to improve intake temps? I've taken a couple of steps, which are just really simple ones that just might get you 3 or 4 degrees Celsius improvement in intake temps, and I'll talk about that as we go up to the front of the car. And then the other big thing is, you know, people talk about, okay, well, let's improve the intercooler and the heat exchangers, and that's true. I'll tell you, the low-hanging fruit is heat exchangers. So when you got an air-to-water system, you want to get as much frontal area over heat exchangers as possible in the car. So the largest heat exchangers you can get, but not just the largest, not just the thickest, you want the largest surface area. So you want the largest amount exposed to air, and then you want the best design of a heat exchanger. So multiple dense fins with tubes that are multiple pass, so 2, 3, 4 pass systems that increase capacity. And then you can increase the water capacity by putting larger reservoirs in that are not just acting as a bottle that feed an overfill bottle, but an actual reservoir that you pass the water through in and out of. So you can put in 2, 3, 4, 10-gallon reservoirs. You can trunk mount them with larger pumps. You can do all these things, increase water capacity. If you trunk mount them, you can make them large enough to be able to dump a bunch of ice in. That ice is going to melt within just a couple of runs, but if you want to get some just incredible runs at the track, you can throw that in the trunk. They call them ice boxes, and you'll get, you know, just way sub-ambient intake temps, which is pretty cool. I'm, again, looking for myself motorsports quality, you know, reliability, and so I want something that's going to work for me all the time. Hot days, track work, you know, and ice boxes obviously don't do that, although they do increase water capacity, which is good. And things like, you know, meth, I'm not interested in, you know, and things like killer chillers, you know, use an air conditioning system to cool the water. I've done that on multiple builds, and it's just not something I do on actual, you know, daily driver track car builds. That's something I would just do for somebody who just wants a Hail Mary quarter-mile pass. They're absolutely not track worthy. In my opinion, they're not even canyon carving worthy interchillers and killer chillers and things like that. So that really brings us down to increasing water capacity, running the right kind of water through your system, increasing flow by either running the pump faster or putting a larger pump usually, and then increasing surface area of the heat exchangers. And so the lowest hanging fruit that gets you a huge bang for the buck is throwing a big heat exchanger in there. And so, you know, on the Giulia 2.0 liter, we have one heat exchanger. It's a front mount. It is right here. And it's, like I said, it's big. It's big. But it sits behind a couple of radiators, and in the quad and in the Stelvio, there's a second, you know, side mount. We don't have that. So what you can do is add an additional heat exchanger. And so this is one that I've used on Camaro SS builds. You take them from a ZL1 that has a supercharger on it. And then if you're going to throw a supercharger on like a Camaro SS, like a TVS 2300 or 1900, you want to air-to-water intercool, and we throw these heat exchangers up front. I've used a couple of these before, and they will just barely fit. It's not the best design. In fact, I usually end up replacing these with ones that are much better. And so it would be, you know, definitely an improvement by adding it for us, but I want something better than that. So I'm going to actually go with an Edelbrock unit that is similar in size to this. However, it is also a little bit thicker, and it dual passes, and it's just a much more robust unit than this, you know, kind of OEM style one. That just gives you an example. Is that these are very simple to mount up, by the way. You literally just put a couple of brackets on it. You throw them up front, you get some 3/4 inch heater hose and connect them, and you can have this, you know, this heat exchanger system added in a couple of hours for literally a couple $100. And you know, I've done it, you know, half dozen times at least. And so that is something that we'll look at doing on this car if we decide to make it a pure track car, definitely. Like I said, for right now, you know, just under moderate driving and lap days, it has no problem keeping up whatsoever. I would definitely want to upgrade the heat exchanger if we're doing something like competitive driving, time trials, things like that, and in, you know, 100 plus, you know, degree temps all the time, and trying to push absolute maximum boost, 31 psi or something like that. I'm not doing that, but again, does not hurt to add cooling. And then, like I said, just to go over the last, you know, kind of little things that we do. So here's your heat exchanger intercooling loop of liquid. Here you can see I'm running basically 100% water. I've got like, you know, 1 or 2% of a supercoolant in there to make sure that we don't get any corrosion. So making sure we have, you know, the correct corrosion resistance and, you know, lubrication, all that good stuff in there. So that's what's running through my loop. You know, running pure distilled water or whatever is going to reduce your intake temps by sometimes maybe around 4 degrees Celsius or so, compared to running a 50-50 coolant and water mix. That's not as efficient at dissipating heat as straight water is. And then you want to make sure you have that corrosion resistance in there, so make sure you treat that water with the supercoolant water wetter. You know, VP Racing, I don't, Royal Purple has one. Everybody has one. I like the supercoolant because it's a lot less foaming, and if you end up upgrading the water pump, the auxiliary water pump for this loop, you can get a lot of cavitation and foaming and things like that. And so I like them to have the absolute least amount of foaming possible. And water wetter, I get foam sometimes if I'm running just like crazy, you know, water pumps. So and the water pump, you know, is right down there. And I'm going to experiment with that water pump. There's also a valve down there, and yeah, you can kind of see it. The valve right down there. Yeah, right there. And that cycles the coolant in and out of the intercooler loop. And so, you know, being able to look at that and see, can we just go ahead and bypass that valve so we're always cooling the air, and you know, always you know, running the liquid through the heat exchanger system. Definitely some low-hanging fruit there, and that would be like just a really simple 15-minute just bypassing that valve so we're always cooling that fluid. So again, these are just some really easy things that I'll be experimenting with, and kind of let y'all know how that further, you know, improves the setup. You know, I could in the future, again, if I do end up going full track with this car and actually, you know, turning into something significant, then, you know, you can upgrade. Right now, this is just an overflow bottle. As you can see, there's only one tube going to it. With a true, you know, with a true reservoir where you're adding capacity, you could up this to 2, 3, 4, 5 gallons, and you'd have both your in and outs going to it. So you're cycling that fluid. This extra fluid here is really doing nothing for capacity because it's not being recycled. And so but you can get a reservoir and you just add the loop, and so you're looping all that water through the system, and that gives you a lot of extra capacity for water. And so we can look at doing that as well. Lots to do. So just wanted to update you on the progress. Very happy with this setup. Runs just extremely strong. No issues whatsoever as far as like check engine lights, stumbling, drivability. The drivability is better than when this car had the stock turbo on it. And I mean, just ultimately, it's just been an awesome upgrade. Let's say we're up probably about 70 horsepower on top of the tuned turbo. So we're up in probably that, roughly at 390, 395 horsepower range. And it's been great. I couldn't have been more happy with the outcome. I thought I'd have to, quite frankly, do a lot more to make it work well, and it's literally, you know, kind of plug and play. So it's been a very nice, pleasant surprise.